All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about how to manage stress, worry, and anxiety. My name is Cynthia, and I'm a therapist by profession. I have a small private practice in the Ottawa area. And in addition to seeing clients on a regular basis, I also do a lot of workshop facilitation like this webinar that I'll be online with you for the next hour or so. If you'll notice as we go along, I will have some questions for you. They're more just self-reflection questions pertaining to the material that I'm going to cover and things for you to think about moving forward when you're thinking about, how you yourself are managing your own stress and anxieties. So some specific objectives that I'm hoping to cover with you today. So we'll talk a little bit about defining the differences between stress and anxiety and worry. We'll also look at talking about the sources of stress and worry. We'll also talk about how does stress impact us, and I'll talk a little bit more about the stress response and the fight or flight response. And then probably closer to the end, but still a good chunk of our time together, I'm really going to focus on some specific strategies that you can use in terms of helping you manage stress and anxiety. Now, certainly there is a lot more strategies available out there. But for today's webinar, I decided to select a few. Some I will go into more detail than others. Others I will just list them again as other resources that on your end you can go and look into if that's something that sort of speaks to you in terms of helping you manage your stress a little bit better. So let's talk a little bit about stress to start off with. So what is stress? So according to the APA, stress can affect people of all ages, genders, and circumstances, and can lead to both physical and psychological health issues. By definition, stress is any uncomfortable emotional experience accompanied by predictable biochemical, physiological, and behavioral changes. Now, there's different types of stress that we recognize. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about each one of these. So acute stress is actually the most common type of stress that we encounter. It's our own body's immediate reaction to a new challenge, event, or demand, and it triggers our inner fight or flight response, which, like I said, I'll be talking a little bit more about in detail further down in the presentation. So as the pressures of a near-miss automobile accident, an argument with a family member, or a costly mistake at work sink in, your body actually turns on this biological response. Acute stress isn't necessarily always negative. It's also the experience you have when you're riding a roller coaster or having a person jump out at you in a haunted house. Isolated episodes of acute stress should not have any lingering health effects. In fact, they may actually be healthy for you, as these stressful situations give your body and brain practice in developing the best response to future stressful situations. Severe acute stress, such as stress suffered as the victim of a crime or life-threatening situation, can lead to mental health problems down the road, such as post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder. Now, there's also what we call episodic acute stress. So this is when acute stress happens frequently. People who always seem to be having, for example, a crisis are often experiencing episodic acute stress. They're often short-tempered, irritable, and anxious. people also who are worrywarts or pessimistic or tend to see the negative side of everything also tend to have episodic acute stress. Negative health effects are persistent in people with episodic acute stress. It may be hard for people with this type of stress to change their lifestyle as they accept stress as part of their life. The third type of stress that we also see is what we call chronic stress. So if acute stress isn't resolved and it begins to increase or last for long periods of time, it becomes chronic stress. This stress, in contrast, doesn't go away, and it can stem from such things as poverty, a dysfunctional family, an unhappy marriage, a bad job, etc. Chronic stress can be detrimental to your health because it can contribute to several serious diseases or health risks, such as heart disease, cancer, lung disease, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and even suicide. Now let's talk a little bit about worry and anxiety. So worry and anxiety go together, and you'll see why in a moment. So worry is more defined as being the mental distress or agitation resulting from concern, usually for something impending or anticipated. Anxiety is an uncomfortable feeling of worry about something that is happening or might happen or a cause of this. So anxiety and worry are certainly normal things that we all can experience, same as with what we were just mentioning about with stress. However, when it starts lingering or becoming more chronic or more prevalent, or when it starts impacting one's functioning, and our definition of functioning is really, is the person having issues in their everyday life, whether that be with work, whether that be with relationships, right? All those things are things that we consider one's ability to function. And once we see some negative impact on those things, those should be cues that perhaps we're not talking about just everyday worry or everyday anxiety. Perhaps even an anxiety disorder is starting to set in, right? Something a little bit more pressing is happening, and something that we certainly want to be paying attention to. Okay. So signs and symptoms of stress. So according to the American Institute of Stress, we actually say that there's more than 50 signs and symptoms of stress. So I won't list them here, all all in front of you, but just note that certainly there is a plenary of different things that one can experience, such as some that I've listed here, which are either a sign or a symptom, and that sometimes when we can't really explain why something is happening, oftentimes we do try to see if there could be a link with perhaps something stressful that we might be experiencing. So a sign is really what is visible, what can be observed. So things like, a headache, some tremors, sweating, those kinds of things that people outside from us can also notice are happening. And the symptom is more something that me, myself, is experiencing and that other people may not necessarily pick up on because, again, it's just within myself. So if I think about feeling overwhelmed, well, feeling overwhelmed doesn't necessarily have a specific way that it's manifesting itself to the world. However, within myself, internally, I do feel that happening, right, within my body. Same with difficulty to focus or concentrate. Other people around me may not notice that I'm struggling in that respect, but I know that it's taking me longer to pay attention to things, right, or to be able to complete tasks that I typically can complete actually very easily. So here I've just put this diagram up because I do find that it's a nice illustration to kind of just show again different ways that stress can impact our bodies. So you'll notice that different anatomical parts of our body are affected by stress. So there's impacts on our nervous system, our muscles, right? So if you think about just yourself when you usually experience stress, you might find that your muscles get tense, and that's because they are preparing to respond to the stressor at hand. But there is a contraction of muscles that is usually happening. Oftentimes, people may say that they find it difficult to breathe, so they might be hyperventilating. In some extreme cases, that can bring on a panic attack. Some people might also notice changes in their heartbeat. Certainly, there is production of cortisol and adrenaline from our endocrine system. And gastrointestinal systems. So usually when people are stressed, certainly, between your esophagus and your stomach, usually people will describe having various, issues in that respect. So sometimes I'll hear people talk about having, quite a lot of heartburn, stomach cramps, stomach pains, nausea. People who already have other pre-existing gastrointestinal conditions will see some of those symptoms probably exacerbated when under stress. So someone who's struggling with Crohn's or IBS or anything like this, certainly stress is something that they try to work on minimizing or avoiding as much as possible because, again, they'll see quite a big flare-up in terms of some of their symptoms. And you'll notice here there's also some impact also on reproductive system, right? So having stress, again, for long periods of time can have an impact on both men and women. So what is your stress response? So this is the first question that I would sort of throw back at you in terms of everything that I'm already starting to talk about, trying to think on your end, what does that look like? So when I am stressed, right, what ends up happening, or what are things that people perhaps around me pick up on, and what are things that I myself have picked up on in terms of, again, those signs and symptoms? It's really important for us to understand what our own stress response looks like because, like we said earlier, that will be different from person to person. And if I don't know what my stress response is or what it looks like, well, I might not catch things as early or as quickly as I could, right? Because the thing is that if you think about a burning house, what do, right? You see a burning house, you're probably going to call 911, right? But within ourselves, if we don't pick up on that, something internally is happening, well, we won't be going to get that extra help or that support or, put an extra strategy in place to help us mitigate or manage whatever it is that's causing this sort of a response. So it's really, really important for us to recognize just within ourselves, what is that picture? What would I be describing if I were describing me in a stressful situation? Now let's talk a little bit about some signs and symptoms of anxiety. So signs and symptoms of anxiety are actually very similar to those of stress. So it can be anything from sweating, palpitations, shortness of breath, nausea, difficulty to focus or concentrate. There could be sleep issues, changes in appetite. Right? There's really a plenary of different signs and symptoms that one can experience when they're anxious. And if someone has a specific anxiety disorder, certainly there's specific signs and symptoms that will be present in each of those. But just on a general scale, what to keep track of is that certainly, if you're experiencing any any of these things or changes in your body that you're not sure what to account them to, it could be a sign that maybe you're worried or preoccupied about something, which could be some anxiety, or it could be, again, a stressor that's come on, and your body is sort of trying to respond to it in the best way that it can. Usually when we have a sign or a symptom and it's more anxiety related than just a stress response, it can be something that's going to last longer. And usually when we talk about anxiety, as I was mentioning, it's usually tied to this piece around a worry or fear that's, again, not necessarily real. It could be just perceived, but there's sort of this threat, right? This impending threat that could be happening that is creating this type of response. Also important to note that when we look at anxiety, and there are some studies being made now to look at this particular piece. So oftentimes what we notice is that there's also an underlying piece around lack of confidence or low self-esteem, where the person, when they're sort of thinking about these worries or these preoccupations that they have, what can be happening is that they also don't believe in their own ability to manage or to deal with the situations if they were to arise. Right? So the person is sort of caught in this tunnel vision where all they see is this impending doom, so to speak, but no way out. Okay? And it's not that there isn't a way out. It's that a lot of times there is this piece of their, inability to see that they could cope, that they could manage, even if something bad were to happen. So let's talk a little bit about what could be some sources of stress or worry. Obviously, just about anything can cause us levels of stress. I've listed a few of the main categories that probably most of our stressors or worries would fall into, but certainly you may have some different ones that you would list here. Work, probably one of the biggest ones. Outside of our personal life, that is where we spend the most of our adult time. And so certainly there can be all sorts of different work-related stressors that could be impacting us or affecting us, right? If you think about, all the changes in our society, we're in a fast-paced society. There's a lot of emphasis on being productive, being successful, right? And all these things sort of add up, right? Cutbacks, right? Usually when a company has a cutback, it doesn't mean that they've cut back their production or the things that they're expecting of their employees, but they've cut back perhaps how many employees are actually doing these jobs. And so the ones who are left behind, so to speak, end up sometimes having to do more work, right, or additional work. Financial, so certainly, finances can be a very large source of stress for a lot of different people. Your home life, so anything that's going on at home, whether that be with your children, your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, aging parents, you have a flood in your home, right? All sorts of things like this certainly can be stress-inducing situations. All our various relationships, intimate, personal, colleagues, work, friends, family, right? Anything that's happening in those relationships could also have an impact on our stress levels, and obviously our overall health. So if we have some health issues that have come up, that can be something else that can also be causing us some levels of stress. And also I wanted to note that there's also positive situations that can also be some sources of stress for us. So sometimes things that are very exciting in my life can be also stressful at the same time. I myself, had a son about 2 years ago now. So although that was a very exciting change that was about to happen, certainly it was something that was bringing on also some levels of stress and worry because, it was my first child and, you don't know really what to expect and things like that. If you think about other big life changes like getting married, buying a home or building a home, buying a new vehicle, even in the workplace, a new job, a new promotion, right? All these great and exciting things that you can be experiencing can also be sources of stress. So what happens when we're stressed or when we're anxious, right? So this is maybe something that you are familiar with, but I did want to take a little bit of time to go over it because it's important for us to understand why is it that we're putting so much focus on particular strategies when we're thinking about stress management or working on our anxiety issues, and there's a whole science behind that. And so if you're not familiar with this, great. If you are, then it'll be just a good refresher. So essentially, whenever our brain associates a situation with being something that we should be worried about or stressed about or fearful of, it engages in what we call the stress response or the fight or flight response. And so we talked already a little bit about signs and symptoms. Those signs and symptoms actually come after this process has been engaged. So what happens is that, if I pick an example, I'm at a park and a bear walks in front of me. So in a split second, and it's not something that I'm conscious about, it's an unconscious process that happens, my brain is already evaluating this bear coming into my vicinity. Is it something that I need to be scared about or worried about or whatnot? And if it perceives that, yes, I should be worried, what will happen is this sequence of events. So essentially, the hypothalamus, part of my brain, is going to recognize that threat and send a message to my adrenal gland, which then will trigger the release of adrenaline and cortisol to the endocrine system, as well as noradrenaline to the brain. And then from there, this will prompt the fight or flight response. And then usually we will see those signs and symptoms that we talked about. Sweaty hands, changes in heartbeat, changes in our digestion, changes even in terms of our skin, maybe being more flush, right? There's all sorts of things that then our body will actually be producing or doing that people will be able to see. But internally, this is sort of what starts happening even just before then. And this is every single time that a situation is perceived as being a possible threat. And that's important to note because I'm not going to specifically talk about that today, about cognitive restructuring or, using CBT strategies to help with stress and worry or anxiety. It is an approach in psychology that is, yes, quite helpful to help us look at things differently, but I did want to note it because it is an important element. It's just in question of trying to pick my strategies to focus on today. I decided to focus more on the mindfulness and the relaxation exercises. But certainly cognitive strategies also play into this, because if I can change how I'm perceiving certain things, maybe that stress response won't even happen. And if that stress response doesn't happen, then I'm not pumping that cortisol in my body. I'm not pumping that adrenaline in my body. And the other thing to note as well is that every time our system is engaged in this stress response, in the fight or flight response, it's a part of our nervous system that's called the sympathetic nervous system that is actually being engaged. And during that time, the other part, the other nervous system that I have, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, that one cannot be engaged at the same time. So they sort of work as an on and off switch. So while sympathetic is activated, parasympathetic is off. When parasympathetic is on, sympathetic is off. The parasympathetic nervous system is a part of us that takes care of relaxation. Okay, so I cannot be relaxed and agitated at the same time. Okay, it's actually biologically impossible for that to be happening. And so the reason why I wanted to mention this is because a lot of times when I talk to clients about relaxation strategies, deep breathing exercises, mindfulness, meditation, I will often get people who will tell me, oh, I don't like that, or, that doesn't speak to me, and all these reasons why they perhaps don't want to try these strategies. And so I take the time to educate a little bit about why it is that I am suggesting these things. I'm not suggesting these things because they're pretty much in every book that you might buy, at chapters these days on stress or anxiety, but I suggest them because we know that they work. And why do we know that they work? It's because of this particular process. If I tell someone or I ask someone to engage in a relaxed response, so purposely calming their breathing, kind of shutting off their mind to the world, just being in the moment, I know physiologically during that time, their body is not producing cortisol, it's not producing adrenaline, it's not preparing to fight or flight anything, it's only being present, it's being relaxed, okay? And that's very, very important because our system is not made to always be on. Our system is not made to always be engaged in this fight or flight response, right? But with the hectic times that we are in, the busy lives that we lead, a lot of times our bodies don't know how to be relaxed anymore. And so that's, my little education piece around, why it is that you may hear a lot about those strategies. There's been a lot of studies, a lot of research done, and we are seeing those direct sort of benefits happening when we engage in those types of activities. So before I get into the specific strategies that I'm going to talk about, these are some questions that I'd like you to think about on your end, right? What are things that you do to unwind and relax? What are the things that you do for fun? What do you do in which the only purpose is for you to take care of yourself? Right? These are very, very important questions to ask ourselves because maybe for some of you, these are things that you have answers to all of these questions. There's a lot of these things that you're already doing, which is great. But I can tell you that I'm sure that there's some of you listening to this that can probably say you have no answer for some of these questions. There's always a lot of people who struggle to make the time or, haven't made themselves a priority in a long time because other things sort of took over, right? So things to kind of keep in mind. And then with what I'm suggesting today, these are going to be maybe some other strategies that you can consider integrating as part of your own, toolbox in terms of how to better manage stress and anxiety or worry as it comes up for you. So obviously there's the whole sphere around self-care, right? And self-care can look like a lot of different things. I listed a few different things here, but certainly this is not necessarily an exhaustive list. Things like breaks, mini breaks throughout your day even. Making sure that when you're at work that you're eating your lunch and not working always throughout your lunch. Do you take your 10, 15-minute breaks throughout your day to just, get up if you're in a sit-down position at work, get up and move around, or if you're always on your feet, taking a little break to be able to sit down and listen to something or look at something on your phone or have a book that you can look at, right? Whatever it is that break can look like, it's really helpful and very necessary. It actually helps you be more focused throughout your day. Exercise, right? So exercise is important. Obviously, it keeps us healthy, in terms of, managing our weight and things like this. But it's also very healthy when you think about the stress response, right? And that those chemicals that are being produced in our system, the adrenaline and the cortisol. Exercise, what it does is that it actually helps flush out those toxins because they are toxic if they're in our systems for too long. It helps flush them out. Okay, so if you any kind of like very large traumatic situation, when we go on site and talk to people after the fact, that is one of the reasons why we do encourage people to stick to their exercise routine, or if they don't usually do exercise, we do encourage them to try to incorporate some sort of physical activity, because under the stress of that particular situation, their system is going to be producing quite a lot of cortisol and adrenaline, right, from the shock of that traumatic situation. So same with everyday stressors, right? Every time that I'm producing those chemicals, I hopefully need to have a way to evacuate them, and exercise is a great way to do that. Watching what we eat is important. You can do some reading, connecting with others, spending time with friends or family, learning something new. Sometimes learning a new skill is something that's also helpful to help us better manage our stress. Feels like we're accomplishing something, but it's really for us. Anything that's creative, painting, sewing, crafts, it could be music, right? I mean, there's just all sorts of different things that we can list here. Journaling, right? Whether it's journaling about, your current experience, whether it's, I have several clients recently talking a lot about doing gratitude journals. So, they're using a journal in a way that's really trying to focus on the positive, and sort of, taking a recap of their day and saying, what was good about what was happening today. Making sure you get enough sleep is also crucial. Now, if you have a sleep disorder or other, sleep apnea or things like this that are happening, certainly, yes, that's going to be a little bit of an obstacle. But, trying to make sure that you stick to a usual sleep routine and that you have good sleep hygiene, which means that you're doing things that allow you to get some proper sleep. That's going to be very helpful. And also learning to set limits. So being able to say no to people, not always taking things on when you already have perhaps a lot on your plate, and knowing when, you need to kind of make that time for yourself, because it's very easy for us to, tonight I don't really feel like doing anything, so I'm just going to, maybe watch some TV or things like that, which can be great and can actually be part of the self-care strategy. But sometimes, we get into little ruts or little habits of not really making that time for ourselves, where it's time to recharge, right? Whatever it is that you're doing, you want to make sure that it's helping you recharge and resource yourself. And I found this diagram online, so I really wanted to share it because I like images, and it takes away from just the plain PowerPoint screens that are just different words on the screen. But having nice little images like this, I just wanted to show it to you because sometimes we aren't sure about what are things that could actually be things that allow us to take a pause or that allow us to do something fun for ourselves. And I thought that this really depicted quite a lot of different things that, again, if you don't have a lot in your toolbox of ideas, maybe one of these strategies might speak to you. All right. I'll move on to the next slide. Just want to make sure that everybody had a chance to take a look at what was here. So now I'll talk a little bit about mindfulness. Again, some of you may be familiar with this concept. Some of you perhaps may not. Mindfulness has been around for a very, very long time, but probably not all that long when you think about more Western medicine. But it is something that is being more and more incorporated on a holistic level, because we know of its amazing benefits, right? So essentially, if we look at defining what mindfulness is, it's really the basic human ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we are doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So it's sort of being able to be in a moment and not be caught up, right, in the tornado that could be swirling around us. Now, while mindfulness is something we all naturally possess, it is more readily available to us when we practice it on a daily basis. That's something else that I also remind my clients is that, I can show you all sorts of different strategies, but unless you really take the time to put them into practice on a regular basis, there's a pretty good chance that you may not necessarily be able to practice it when you really need it, right? So if you're saying, I want mindfulness to be a strategy that I can use when I'm really stressed or overwhelmed, well, if you don't practice it regularly, it'll probably be quite difficult for you to just start incorporating it because you're just not familiar with it. And mindfulness is actually something that is quite difficult for us as human beings to practice. So it's something that, again, we gain the experience by continuously putting it into practice for ourselves. Now, meditation, on the other hand, is not getting to a fixed destination. So it's heads that are vacuumed free of thought, utterly undistracted, will go to a special place where each and every moment is momentous. It's exploring. We get to venture into the workings of our minds, our sensations, like air blowing on our skin or a harsh smell wafting into the room. Our emotions, love this, hate that, crave this, loathe that. And thoughts, wouldn't it be weird to see an elephant playing a trumpet? Mindfulness meditation allows us to suspend judgment and unleash our natural curiosity about the workings of the mind, approaching our experience with warmth and kindness to ourselves and others. And if you want to know more about this piece on mindfulness and meditation, I put the source here on the website I consulted for this wonderful information. They actually have a lot of videos and things that you can go and click on that are also very helpful in you learning, mindfulness-based practices. If that's something that's of interest, you just go to mindful.org. They've got some really great information there. So I wanted to go through some basics of mindfulness practice. So as we were saying, mindfulness really helps us put some space between ourselves and our reactions. It's breaking down our conditioned responses. So the first step in practicing mindfulness is setting some time aside. You don't need a meditation cushion or a bench or any sort of special equipment to access your mindfulness skills, but you do need to set aside some time and some space. Secondly, you need to observe the present moment as it is. The aim of mindfulness is not quieting the mind or attempting to achieve a state of eternal calm. The goal is simple. We're aiming to pay attention to the present moment without judgment. Easier said than done, we know. Third, you want to let your judgments roll by. So when we notice judgments arise during our practice, so the judgments would be sort of those little whispers, right, or those thoughts that are trying to creep in, okay? We can take a mental note of them and let them pass, right? We don't kind of hang on to them and grasp at them. We notice they're there, and we bring ourselves back to the moment. Fourth, return to observing the present moment as it is. So our minds often get carried away in thought, and that's why mindfulness is the practice of returning again and again to the present moment. And sometimes people get discouraged with that. Sometimes people feel like if they're really implementing mindfulness, well, I shouldn't always have to bring my mind back. But as we're saying here, it's always something that we have to continuously work on. And sometimes, if we have a lot going on, it's going to be natural for the mind to start to wander or start to worry, right? So we want to kind of retrain it to remind it that it's okay to have a break from it, that it's okay to take a step back. And lastly, you want to be kind to your wandering mind. So don't judge yourself for whatever thoughts crop up. Just practice recognizing when your mind has wandered off and gently bring it back. That's the practice. It's often been said that it's very simple, but it's not necessarily easy. The work is to just keep doing it, and results will accrue with time. And I found this image as well. It was actually on the same site as the breaks 50 ways to take a break. But again, just little images that depict a little bit about what mindfulness is all about. Now I'll talk a little bit about meditation. So like we had described earlier, meditation is also in line with mindfulness because it is, trying to be present in the moment. And there's a wide variety of ways of practicing meditation. Prayers can also be a form of meditation as well. This is one experience of meditation that I did take from that Mindful.org website, but there is guided meditations, there's walking meditations, there's all sorts of different types, right? So you can also maybe keep that in mind in case you want to try different ones, or you're curious and you want to learn more about what kind of meditations might be available to you. I would strongly suggest doing a quick search even on YouTube or whatnot. You can find a lot of great free meditations that you're being guided into, and so it kind of takes the guessing away, because if you're not sure how to do it, you don't necessarily have to take a class. Certainly those could be good as well, but just on your own, these are very accessible and easy to practice. So an example of a meditation practice would be to first make sure that you're sitting comfortably. So finding a spot that gives you a stable and solid, comfortable seat. And you want to notice first what your legs are doing. So if you're on a cushion, cross your legs comfortably in front of you. And if on a chair, rest the bottoms of your feet on the floor. Straighten your upper body, but don't stiffen. Your spine has natural curvature. Let it be there. Now notice what your arms are doing. Situate your upper arms parallel to your upper body. Rest the palms of your hands on your legs, wherever it feels more natural. Soften your gaze. Drop your chin a little and let your gaze fall gently downward. It's not necessary to close your eyes. You can simply let what appears before your eyes be there without focusing on it. Now feel your breath. Bring your attention to the physical sensation of breathing, the air moving through your nose or mouth, the rising and falling of your belly or your chest. Notice when your mind wanders from your breath. Inevitably, your attention will leave the breath and wander to other places. Don't worry. There's no need to block or eliminate thinking. When you notice your mind wandering gently, return your attention to the breath. Be kind about your wandering mind. You may find your mind wandering constantly, and that's normal too. Instead of wrestling with your thoughts, practice observing them without reacting. Just sit and pay attention. As hard as it is to maintain, that's all there is. Come back to your breath over and over again without judgment or expectation. When you're ready, gently lift your gaze. If your eyes are closed, open them. Take a moment and notice any sounds in the environment. Notice how your body feels right now. Notice your thoughts and emotions. So essentially, this is a very, simplified meditation. It probably only took me about a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes, to read it out to you. But this could be a great starting point if that's something that you want to try to incorporate, as part of your, sort of self-care or part of your strategies to help you manage stress and just learn to be more relaxed and calmer despite things that are going on around you. Now, I won't go into necessarily great details of other relaxation exercises, but I did want to point a few others out because, again, these all tie in, again, to that relaxation response, right, which helps us not always be in that stress response mode. So other relaxation exercises certainly include any kind of breathing or deep breathing practices. If you do a lot of yoga, or if you've done yoga before, you probably have a certain way of breathing that your yogi was perhaps trying to teach you or has taught you. And there are different ways of breathing. So I can't say that there's necessarily a consensus out there in terms of what is the best or proper way to breathe, okay? There's going to be different versions depending on different classes you may take or different literature that you may read on. For those of you who don't know much about deep breathing exercises, the idea behind practicing this type of exercise is that especially with anxiety, we tend to see a lot of shortness of breath, even hyperventilation. I've had clients come and sit down in my office and just almost ramble on without almost gasping for air. And so what's happening, right, is that, again, in that anxious response and that stress response, this is what's happening to their body. And so we can retrain, just like when we're doing meditation or mindfulness practices, we can sort of retrain the body to understand what does that look like when I'm taking really nice deep breaths, right? Which is really normally how my body is supposed to be breathing. So if you're not familiar with any at all, I'm going to suggest this first, again, very basic and simple breathing technique, and it can be something, again, that you learn to practice on a regular basis. If you do experience a lot of anxiety, you may notice that this is difficult to do, so you will start with what you can, and again, keep at it. Keep doing it regularly. The more that you do it, the more that when those stressful situations or anxiety-triggering situations happen, that you can go then and use that technique because you really know it very well. So for abdominal breathing, what you want to do is place one hand on your chest and the other on your abdomen. When you take a deep breath in, the hand on the abdomen should rise higher than the one on the chest. This ensures that the diaphragm is pulling air into the bases of the lungs. After exhaling, through the mouth, take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, imagining that you are sucking in all the air in the room, and hold it for a count of 7, or as long as you are able to, but not exceeding 7. Slowly exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. As all the air is released with relaxation, gently contract your abdominal muscles to completely evacuate the remaining air from the lungs. It is important to remember that we deepen respirations not by inhaling more air, but through completely exhaling it. Repeat the cycle 4 more times for a total of 5 deep breaths, and try to breathe at a rate of 1 breath every 10 seconds or 6 breaths per minute. At this rate, our heart rate variability increases, which has a positive effect on cardiac health. So like I was saying, there's other forms of breathing exercises, breathing techniques. There's the square breathing technique that I'm familiar with. I know also people, again, who have done particular yoga practices who are familiar also with different variations of how long you inhale, hold your breath, or exhale. So again, you can practice different strategies. The idea is to just help us slow down our breathing, right? And make sure we're taking nice, deep breaths and really exhaling all that air that's sort of coming in. And those are exercises as well that we can kind of add things as we get better at them or more familiar with them. Like if you think about like little mantras. So when you're inhaling, for example, you could have a little mantra where you're talking to yourself and saying, as I'm inhaling, gratitude and appreciation and love for myself. And when I exhale, I'm kind of trying to notice all of that stress in my body just evacuating and just leaving my body as I'm exhaling. So those are just like some words I'm throwing out there. It can be different words that you use, but you can tie those into that practice. And again, it helps put a little bit of an experience to something that's intangible that we are experiencing within ourselves, right? Whether that's the stress or the anxiety or the anger or the worry, whatever it is we're trying to let go of, we can incorporate those messages subtly into these kinds of relaxation practices. Yoga obviously is another great form of a relaxation practice that's really great to help learn how to ground yourself. It's also good for the body because it's great stretching. I'm not talking about the hot yoga or things like this, but I'm just talking about really some basic, intro to yoga type of things. Yoga that is really just meant to be more focused on being present and in the moment. There's also this other exercise that, again, you can look it up. It's called progressive muscle relaxation exercise. And essentially it's an exercise where you learn how to relax all the different muscles in your body, kind of starting from your toes all the way to your head. And on YouTube, there's some excellent guided versions of this. You can also find scripts that you could read to yourself online. But in my experience, a lot of my clients like to have the audio. It's just easier for them to follow. You just kind of sit down or lay down and have the video, the person speak and guide you into the exercise. Now we'll just touch briefly on some other ways to also manage some stress and some anxiety. So again, I'm going back to this whole piece around recognizing your own signs and symptoms. If you don't know what's happening for you when you're in a stress response, then it'll probably be very difficult for you to know that you should be doing something about what's going on. Obviously, eliminate stress when at all possible. So if you recognize some of your sources of stress, you can also ask yourself questions about whether or not there's things you can do or ways that you can eliminate it completely. Your attitude and perception. So like I said, today I wasn't focusing on cognitive strategies or CBT protocols, but certainly there is things that we can do in terms of how we're interpreting things. How do we look at things differently? Can we be more positive in our outlooks? Asking for help, right? So, hopefully, we're making some good headway on that, but not being afraid to say that you need some extra help or support. Talking about how things are impacting you to those around you, right? You may not necessarily go to a therapist right away, but maybe you'll talk to a spouse or a partner or a friend or maybe someone at work about what's going on for you. Don't keep it bottled up inside. Prayer can be also a way that people find comfort and find some ease in managing stress that they may be experiencing. Laughing, playing, having fun, having hobbies or interests for ourselves, also great outlets, right, to distract ourselves positively from what's going on. Now, distractions aren't something that we want to do all the time because we do need to take time to reflect on what is going on, but we also need some positive breaks. Setting priorities, being able to say no, like I mentioned earlier, delegating, right, not taking on everything yourself. Be kind to yourself, right? Sometimes there's people who are actually very, very self-critical or very, very hard on themselves, which, to a certain extent, yes, may have a certain advantage. However, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily perhaps the best way that the person can be taking care of themselves, right? Sometimes being too critical or being too harsh towards ourselves doesn't allow us to see, what is good, what is positive. And not being shy to access additional support, right? So again, that could be, yes, going to a therapist or a psychologist, could be talking to a physician or even a nurse practitioner, perhaps even group, right? Sometimes people experiencing various stressors will look for others who are experiencing similar things, and sometimes it can be comforting to hear or speak to other people who might have a similar experience. So what are the main takeaways from the workshop today? Well, hopefully understanding how stress and anxiety, although normal and naturally occurring processes, can impact our well-being over time. Big emphasis on this. Please try to make sure that you recognize and know what your own stress response looks like, and find ways to manage or mitigate the stresses in your life. Today I focused on the mindfulness, meditation, and relaxation practices. I talked a little bit also about self-care, but making sure that you have things, that you have outlets where you are letting go of some of that stress. And I'll leave you on two telling quotes. So the first one is, "You cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." This is by John Kabat-Zinn, who's actually the founder of the Mindfulness Institute in Massachusetts. If ever you're interested in knowing a little bit more about mindfulness, if you Google his name, you will find a lot of information. He has a lot of videos, books out there. He's been on Oprah before, one of her sit-down sessions since she stopped her talk show. And he's a very, very knowledgeable individual when it comes to mindfulness. And nothing is more worth than this day. You cannot relive yesterday. Tomorrow is beyond your reach. So again, I think it's very speaking to, all of the concepts and the pieces that I was trying to bring forward to you today. So on that note, I will wrap up my webinar with you today. I hope that you have some great elements to take away from what I was presenting and discussing with you. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.